Today we're going to be drawing a robot named Soundwave from Transformers. The first thing we're going to do is examine his shapes. And today I want to make sure that we understand we're not drawing this guy perfectly. We're going to be drawing him loosely, lightly, and rough. What I mean is we're going to basically start out with shapes and focus on shapes and not focus on making him exactly like his little action figure here. So as you see, I'm constructing his body with rectangles and squares and a circle for his head. Here's his shoulder blaster, his shoulders, which are basically squares. Rectangles to connect to his forearms. Larger rectangles for his forearms. And then I'm going to position his arm up a little bit so that he can hold his blaster, and a loose cylinder for the blaster itself. Loose square and rectangle for the feet and hands. Make sure you always build your structures with shapes first. See these guys? All shapes, squares, rectangles, and circles. I'm going to change a little bit of his head shape. It's a little more boxy than I actually have it, but I'm going to come in here, add some details because I can still loosely and lightly see that circle that I used for basic construction, and fill that in with some of the details of his head. I'm not trying to be exact, I'm simply trying to copy details based on shapes because I'm keeping this very rough. His head is constructed of longer rectangles, trapezoids, triangles. I'm going to shade in for his eyes, make his mask a little more defined, and his cheeks a little more defined, and the points of his head a little more defined. Now I'm going to come in here and work on his body. His body is basically a rectangle. Now if you remember, Soundwave from Transformers, the original one, transforms into a cassette player. You can ask your teacher what a cassette player is. She probably knows, or he knows. Work on the shoulder blaster, which is going to be a cylinder. Connect it to his shoulder. Do some loose rockets. Bring it back a little bit further. Now I'm going to start working on a few more details of his chest. This is where the cassette would go, and in the original Transformers, the cassette would actually pop out and turn into a robot itself. You'd have like a pterodactyl or a bat or even a panther, which was really cool. Let's work on defining the shapes of his shoulders a little better, and his forearm, which I'm going to have hold the blaster. I'm trying to keep this very loose. Work on the cylinder for his blaster. Now please make sure that if you have not watched the tutorial on cylinders, that you go back and watch that, because it's very important to these kinds of shapes. Working on the details of his blaster. Come back, bring that cylinder back a little bit. His thumb. Details on his forearm. Now let's come over here and work on this shoulder. Define some of these shapes. Remember, I'm still trying to stay loose and rough with the drawing. Bring down his forearm a little bit. That's where the elbow would be. Add some details, define those shapes a little better. I'm going to work on a hand. Now, there will be a tutorial, or is a tutorial coming about hands, but for now I'm just going to keep this shape very simple. I don't want to overcomplicate our drawing. My hand shape It's basically like this. It's very simple, nothing too complex about it, but just draw a square if you have to. Now I'm going to work on his torso, which is a very long rectangle. And on his torso, he has the buttons for the cassette player, which was pause, play, rewind, and fast forward. Now I'm going to connect his legs, come in here and start working on the definition of these shapes. Now, for his legs, I'm going to come in, add details to further flesh out the shape of his legs. Again, I'm staying very loose, trying to add just some of the details to make his legs a little more dimensional. You'll also need to go back and watch the tutorial on drawing three-dimensional shapes. When you are drawing shapes like this robot has here, drawing three-dimensional cubes and rectangles will be very helpful. I noticed that I need to, if this was going to be a more tight drawing, I would actually stretch out his body a little bit. His legs are a little short. Add a few details to his legs, his feet. I know it's very hard for you to see in my picture here, but he has a few more details on his legs. Add these vent-like structures. Now I want to come in and add the shoulder details. It's kind of like an L shape with a few vents and function buttons. Do the same to the other shoulder. Just a few details to flesh out the drawing. Still staying very loose, drawing very lightly. Now I want to come in and work on these details a little bit more on his chest. This is the Decepticon symbol, and I am not going to make this a very tight drawing of the Decepticon symbol, but I'm just going to keep it very simple. I always thought that the Decepticon symbol looked like an upside down arrow or a fox head, but it has a more sinister look than the Autobot symbol, which should be the case because they were the bad guys. Define out a little bit more of the cassette, connect the torso. Now, how does our Soundwave look? How does yours look? Remember, I'm keeping this drawing rough. I'm not trying to make this exactly like our little toy friend. And I'm drawing loose, not tight. I'm not trying to make every line perfect. And always sign your name. Remember to like this video and follow on YouTube. Also, consider supporting this project on Patreon.